Hey guys, welcome to Lather Talk. So it looks like our experiment in converting an Instagram live session as an episode didn't work out as planned in terms of audio quality and audience interest. We're still early in the stages of the podcast and appreciate you all being along for the ride as we experiment with different things. That being said, we want to keep on doing Instagram lives as it's a great way to interact with you all, but in the future, those sessions will not replace the regular episode, but could pop up as a bonus episode. Now for this week, we are excited to bring you a two-part conversation with Stephen Joyner, brush maker and owner of Dogwood Handcrafts. In this first part, we're going in-depth on a variety of materials used in brush making. If you need some help visualizing, check out the link in our show notes to see some examples of the materials we discussed with Stephen. Now, on to the episode. So on Lather Talk today, we have with us Stephen Joyner, and he is most known for being a brush turner at Dogwood Handcrafts. He also is a current YouTube sensation, as he does some live turnings of not just brushes, but of decorative eggs as well. So he is a man of many talents, and that we are very much looking forward to gaining his expertise and knowledge on a number of brush materials.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
And we're glad to have you as well. And also with me, as usual, is my co-host, Gerard.
What's up, guys? Hello.
Hope you're doing well, Gerard. So, Stephen, today, among many things that we want to talk about, we want to tap into your vast knowledge of various brush materials. And I know before coming on the episode today, you've done in-depth research to bring that info to us today.
That's right. I've gone into the field. I have researched every known brush material known to man, I should say, and I have brought back my findings at great risk of my own life and limb to present them to you and your listeners.
That's top-notch journalism, and we appreciate you for that. But I think we can just launch right into it if you like.
The idea framing this was if you take a cursory glance at any store or artisan's website that makes or sells shave brushes, you see there are a whole slew of materials that they come in. And a lot of people wonder, what is the difference between these two? Does this have advantages over this one? Is there any reason that maybe I should buy one or avoid one? And ultimately, maybe what are all the options if I'm researching, hey, I want to buy a custom brush or I want to get a factory-made one? And so I'm looking specifically at just the differences in what the handles can be made of, not to say anything about the hair specifically, which is its own, entire rabbit hole to go down. And so I put together a list of really what are all the ones that I could think of off the top of my head, and then a few more that I researched to see if I missed anything. And I think it's plenty to get through on its own there.
All right, so let's launch into the various brush materials, Stephen, that you researched into us. So the first one on the list I have is mass-produced plastic. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, it's not exactly a kind terminology for it, but it, I think, evokes the right image of what you should think of. And really, it's I'm talking about the kind of like the cheap plastic that you imagine like children's toys are made of. You see a lot of brushes that come out of China and Pakistan that are made out of this stuff. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's cheap, it's plastic. It's probably the cheapest possible material in how well it's been scaled up. And it can be made using all sorts of molds and things like that. So there's really no need to involve like a human being with a lathe or even a CNC or anything like that. And but at the same time, there's not a lot of ability for you and I to customize it, work like we would working with an artisan, because of the scale that these things are made on. And it's not something that you would see. The bottom line, it's not something that you see in the artisan space. This is a factory material that is you're getting the material and the brush from the same location as a finished item. So it's not something that I've ever worked with, obviously, but it's something that I know of because a lot of your cheapest options are going to be using this. So in like some of the Yaki and Uomo brushes that are not their resin material, but specifically this plastic material.
I see. And you mentioned kind of a scaling or production size. Are we talking like thousands or even more than that?
Yeah, a lot of these places, some of the units that I've seen, they have minimum order quantities that are over 1,000. Some of them as high as 5,000.
Okay.
And
Wow.
I know there's, I think some of the early Maggard handles might have been with this stuff. It's some of the plastics. It's hard to tell just looking at them whether they're from a resin or from this. I don't know. I looked. I can't find a like a unified actual chemical property for what kind of plastic it is. But and then as well, I know that so AP Shave Co. has a Build-A-Brush type of thing that he does where you can get the bottom and the top made from different plastics. And this appears to be a similar sort of material where it's like, okay, they're making thousands of the yellow top, thousands of the black bottom or the blue bottom, and then you have to buy, however many of each.
I see. I think the kind of the children's toy, it gives kind of the perfect image of maybe
Yeah.
it's a little bit brittle, perhaps.
Yeah, at the same time, I mean, they're very durable. I mean, I've had a number of my children's toys that were stomped on by my very large father, and they did great. So
And
I guess
I think
that felt kind of flat, but
I want to say maybe another aspect is of those, because I want to say I've used maybe a couple of these like a long time ago, is that it's like incredibly lightweight, like weighs nothing, right?
That's right.
So,
and a lot of them are hollow inside because to save on the material. So
Oh.
so like sometimes people will like something well balanced or just like with a little bit of heft to them, and these don't. You put that knot in there, and a lot of times it'll tip over if it's just too like heavy on one side or the other.
Yeah, I cut into a Zenith bore brush that was the one that has the, it looks like an aluminum plating on the outside. The inside was just a very thin shell of this plastic, a black shell of this plastic with the knot glued into it. And it was, extremely lightweight. But looking at it, you'd think, oh, it's like a solid piece of metal. But no, it was 90% air.
So next on the list, we have Alumalite.
That's right. Alumalite is a brand of polyurethane resin, and the polyurethane just refers to the chemical makeup of this particular kind, or this branch of resins. And in this case, it's resin is synonymous with plastic in this use. It's like acrylic, it's plastic, it's resin, but polyurethane is the chemical name. And this one is something that I'm incredibly familiar with because it's something that I've used for a very long time. And it's used in a large number of other artisan brushes. You buy it as a 2-part liquid. You combine the liquid, you mix in the pigments, you choose all the colors, and then you pour them together. You control the swirling pattern and everything. And then from there, you would turn this on a lathe, or if you're using a CNC, whatever sort of machine. It's not something that you would really carve by hand or something like that. You could, but it would be very labor intensive due to the nature of the material. What I like about this stuff is it is practically indestructible. I've had slices of it that were incredibly thin that with my fully developed adult strength that I couldn't break. But, at the same time, very, very expensive compared to some of the other options. It can be 3 to 4 times as expensive as other resins made with cheaper materials. And due to its very high strength, it's really difficult to polish it. And the other really big downside is that you have to cure it under pressure. So you can't mix it and then leave it out for it to cure and harden. It has to go into a pressure pot that's like one you would use for paint, not like one you would use for food. And it has to be pressurized to around between like 30 and 60 pounds per square inch. And so that, that's just a drawback of it. It doesn't have a super long working time. So if you're not quick while you're making it, it could theoretically seize up on you and you're left with a cup of goo, hardened goo. But this is a very prolific material. It's one that I really recommend if you want something that's going to last a lifetime and then some. And it can take on any number of stunning appearances. If you've ever seen a Declaration grooming brush, you know exactly what I'm talking about. the interesting thing about Alumalite that you don't necessarily see with some other manufacturers is they make two main varieties, one that is intended to be clear when it's cured, and one that turns opaque solid white when it's cured. Now you can mix white dyes into the clear to make it into a similar appearance to the white one, but you can't unwhiten the white one to make it clear. So if you want something that's like a solid, totally flat color, you could use this white resin and mix in like a blue or a black or whatever, and you would have a completely opaque blank or brush when you're done with it.
Sure.
Whereas with the clear one, if you want to prevent it being translucent or even fully transparent, you have to really bog it down with pigment in order to make sure that, like, for example, you don't see the knot sitting in the hole, which is a problem that you see a lot of times if the resin is under pigmented. And it's something that I try to avoid, since I don't like seeing the knot unless you're intending to, right? Since it's usually kind of ugly. It's not, not really clear. It just looks kind of muddy.
Right. It looked like a error happened at some point, and you're kind of revealing, the seams, if it were.
Yeah. Yeah. But as far as the level of like sparkliness or the amount of color, it all comes down to the concentration of those pigments that you're adding. If you're using something that has a metallic sheen to it, if you only use a couple, like a pinch in an entire brush, it wouldn't show up as much as if you were to use like a teaspoon or even more in a brush. And the same goes if you use a single drop of dye versus like a hearty squirt, which could maybe be as much as a teaspoon or more. I don't really measure it scientifically. It's more of like a duration of like, how long did I squeeze this for?
Mm-hmm.
I guess when it comes to like working with it, like we're going to talk about, different types of resins. Is there a significant difference between, like putting it into a pressure pot or anything like that? Once it's hardened and everything, once you have the blank, is it pretty similar as far as feel and everything?
Yeah, so it actually is drastically different from the next one we're going to talk about. And I can go ahead and launch into that and then kind of compare and contrast.
Yep.
So the next material I wanted to talk about is polyester resin. And the biggest, as far as I know, I'm just one dude. The biggest name that I know in this is a product that's called Silmar 41. This is to my knowledge, the most used polyester resin, and more than that, it's the most used resin in all artisan brush making. So anything that's not mass produced, but even stuff that you can get polyester resin itself, they have pre-made rods that are made in other countries that a lot of people will use. So like all the blanks that Paladin uses on their CNCs are polyester resin, not polyurethane resin. And but otherwise, you've got Wolf Whiskers, I believe, uses it. A lot of the Simpson brushes, and then a lot of the current, so the more modern Yaki and Uomo Chinese brushes are using polyester resin rods to start with. And but pretty much anybody else who starts off making custom brushes, if they're resin, it's probably polyester resin. And the big reason is, I would say number one is price. For $35, you can get a gallon of polyester resin on the internet shipped to you. And that will last you on the order of 20, maybe 30 brushes, depending on how big of pours you're doing. And so you math that out, and that's a very little investment in materials into a brush that you're then going to sell for 40 to 50 times the material cost. So the other big thing is, since it doesn't need pressure for casting, I would say it can benefit from it, but it's absolutely not necessary. You essentially would mix up your blank or your blanks, maybe you do 10 at once if they're all similar, and then you can leave it out on your counter or wherever on your workbench. It's going to cure essentially all the bubbles rise out of it because the resin is thin enough to not sort of trap them in there, whereas the polyurethane is so viscous that by the time the bubbles would have a time to rise out, the resin is already cured and hardened. And so if it's not cured under pressure, it's full of air pockets that you can't really get away. When you turn it, the outside would just be like tiny pockmarked craters all over it, which is not something most people want when they're making like a nice shiny custom brush. So that's the main reasons. It's very accessible, it's very approachable, very, very inexpensive. It does have some big drawbacks to it, but the other thing is that it's substantially easier to polish than Alumalite. As far as if you're measuring the amount of time spent on sanding and polishing to get up to a finish where there's no machining or sanding marks left on your final brush, it's less than half the amount of time in some cases. So it's a big difference that starts to take a toll on you, and plus time is money when you're making handmade goods. So, but the downsides of it, the polyester resin is much more brittle and prone to chipping, both during the process of turning it. If you're not using, like perfectly sharp tools, it can chip or sometimes even explode in your face, or even if it's dropped from a sufficient height. If part of the brush is too thin, say you drop it on the knot cup and the walls are very thin, or if there's like a really thin taper at some point in the handle, that could lead to it breaking. And then the other big thing is that it does give off really bad fumes when you're working with it. So it kind of requires a more ventilated area than these other materials. Hopefully you can kind of see the difference in these two materials that are the most commonly used. The Alumalite, much more expensive, but stronger and harder to work with, versus the polyester, much cheaper, but a lot easier to work with as long as you are using the right equipment, but then potentially more fragile. Anybody that's selling brushes that look plastic in consistency, if they're making them, it's probably one of these two. And that, don't hold me to that, but I can't think of anything else that would make sense when you have the how prolific these materials are.
One thing you mentioned was the polishing time, right? And how I believe the Alumalite was twice or significantly more time, right?
It can be, yeah.
On average, like, what's the amount of time it takes for polyester versus Alumalite brush to finish?
Okay, so I guess for me personally, the sanding and polishing is kind of one continuous phase where as soon as you're done with the cutting, that is when I consider the finishing time.
Okay.
So you start off with your lowest sandpaper, your lowest grit sandpaper, which depending on how good of a job you did with the shaping could be higher or lower. Like if you did a convincing job of smoothing everything over, then you don't need that really low grit sandpaper to round off all the nasty, corners or anything like that, or do any shaping. Like so for example, I usually start around 220, but if I did a particularly bad job, I might need to start as low as 80.
Okay.
But that I would say is uncommon. And then you build up through your sandpapers up until you get into polishing compounds. And then for brushes that are, a polished finish versus a matte finish, you would be moving on to some sort of mechanical buffing device. So it could be as little as, for sanding, it could be as little as 5 minutes if you're doing something that's like a matte white that doesn't show scratches at all. And so you really just have to sand it to a high enough level that it doesn't look like it's scratched up. Whereas if you wanted to do, the hardest thing I would say would be if you wanted something that was like a mirror polished black resin, is going to show the most scratches and scuffs of anything. And you could be sanding and polishing that for upwards of 20 minutes. And
okay.
That's with either material, it really depends, I guess I would say. So my rule of thumb is probably double, and a lot of that time is the buffing process, because a lot of people tend to kind of sand as best as you can and then get to the end and look at it, and rather than going back through all the sanding, just buffing as well as you can to eliminate anything that you might have missed in the process. But with plastic, especially compared to other materials, the buffing makes a huge difference. I guess not every material, I shouldn't say that, but with the plastic, I would say it's definitely required if you're looking to get a polished finish. So whereas if you're using like a metal or something, you could do like a brushed finish on it, and then it's not necessary to then polish it to like a mirror. So, but yeah, time wise, I'd say 5 to 30 minutes, worst case scenario. And if it's that long, then it's going to be a long day if you're doing more than one of those.
One quick question, I guess. Where would acrylic fit in?
Yeah, acrylic is kind of a nebulous term, I think. It's
Okay.
so both of these are technically acrylics.
Got it.
It's some sort of and I'm not a chemist, so like
Okay.
all the chemical names and everything, don't hold my feet to the fire on them. But I believe polyurethane and polyester are both classified as acrylic plastics.
Got it. So yeah, so both of them would be acrylics, but not not all acrylics are Alumalite or polyurethane, or not all acrylics are or polyester by itself. Got it.
And
just to maybe put it out there,
that's
for
right.
people
And
who might be wondering.
There's lots of other acrylics as well that are not commonly used for this, because the nature of these is that they come essentially as epoxies, where it's a liquid that you add a catalyst to of some kind and it becomes a solid. Whereas I think something like fiberglass maybe is formed in a different way. I honestly don't know how that's made, but or something like carbon fiber, or all these things that might have a similar chemical makeup deep down are very different in the in how it actually manifests in the medium.
The next one on the list is ebonite.
Yeah, ebonite, full disclosure, not one that I've used before because, well, I mean, for the reasons I'll get into. I know Declaration has used this. I know Paladin has used it. And I know there's other people now that are using it, but I cannot tell you off the top of my head because it's hard to keep up with so many companies in this rapidly changing environment. But it's a weird sort of different chemical than these other guys. And I'm really not sure what it's made of. I tried to do some research into it, and there's not a lot of information about it. But the takeaway from it, it's incredibly strong, very, very durable, and for that reason, very hard to work with. It can take, from talking to Scott at Declaration, can take 2 to 3 times as long for the finishing process as even Alumalite. It's like trying to polish a tire. It has almost like a hardened rubber kind of consistency to it, but extremely hard, extremely dense, and it just fights you every step of the way. But it's an option, so I wanted to mention it. It's probably will outlast even cockroaches in the nuclear apocalypse. So if you value longevity in a brush, then maybe reach for that.
Yeah, I've seen like brushes made with ebonite, and like they're beautiful. They're just, they almost have like different texture to them, like than some of the other resins and things like that.
It's interesting that all these things that essentially are plastic-like, when you boil them down, can feel radically different in your hands. And the weight, especially if you compare, like the Chinese plastic is extremely light, and then the Alumalite is fairly heavy. Polyester is substantially heavier than Alumalite, although I'm not sure how many people if in a blind test would be able to identify them. But I know a lot of people that claim to be able to identify them. But for me, it gets hard to tell. And then ebonite, I'm not sure where that falls on the scale, but it's definitely on the heavier, denser end.
Yeah, I think some people because the thing I recognize is it almost looks like tree rings sometimes. Like it's just kind of a standout thing, and I see that usually with ebonite brushes, and I think that's almost like their signature.
It's something that I feel like would be very difficult to pull off. It's almost like a Damascus steel that's like layered and twisted and everything. Not really something that you can accomplish by hand with just like 3 cups of different acrylic colors,
And then kind of just going on with the list of things, we have like just wood, any wood, specifically hardwood.
Yeah, your backyard wood. I imagine this is one of the first materials that was used for many things, including shaving brushes. And hardwood makes an awesome brush, and there's a ton of people that do primarily, if not exclusively, wooden brushes. Elite Razor was the big one that I wanted to mention in the artisan space. as well as Briar Brushworks uses briar pieces that are commonly used to make tobacco pipes, but he will use a similar process as pipe creation in brush creation. And I think there's some larger available ones. Like I think Artist Shaving might have a wooden brush. I know the Polyester brushes, I'm pretty sure were some kind of hardwood. And but with the nice thing about the wood, though, you have thousands, if not millions, of variations to pick from just in the species alone. And then within those, each one can have hundreds of different kinds of variations and color patterns and grain structures, all that sort of stuff. Whether you turn it on its ends or on the side can have a drastic difference in how it looks. And there's all kinds of different finishes that you could do on it. You could do your matte finishes all the way up to your super gloss, like glass looking finishes on wood. And so that for my money makes it a great material. But you do have to watch out for a lot of the woods can be incredibly expensive. There's woods I've worked with that just for a block of it, the size of a brush can be, I mean, you can have woods over $100 for a piece that size in something like super exotic in your like crazy exotic burls and whatnot. Or the other big pitfall is that wood is a natural material, so it does have the flaws that a natural material might have in terms of variations. It can experience rot and things like that, and so you want to be using woods that have known properties of durability. And you have to watch out for wood is a porous material that expands and contracts with heat and humidity. And of course, in a bathroom where you're shaving, that is going to be a very, very common environment that it's going to experience. And so you see a lot of wood brushes that'll crack if they're not prepared and finished properly. And sometimes even the ones that are just can't last under that kind of pressure. And if you think about if you have a thin part of the brush where the knot hole is drilled into, that's where you see a lot of them fail. And including some that I've done just, out of not taking the proper precautions. But wood, it needs to be impregnated with something to prevent that swelling, whether you're hardening the wood ahead of time with a stabilizing agent, or if you're finishing it with something that will prevent, a nice sealant that will prevent anything from any moisture from penetrating it.
You mentioned burl. I think a lot of people have, seen the term in terms of shaping, but can you explain exactly what burl is? And, maybe, and I know you're going to talk about it because I know it's what you use a lot in your handles. But yeah, what's burl and why use it compared to just another piece of wood?
Sure. Yeah. So burl is, the dictionary definition, which I happen to have right in front of me, is tree growth in which the grain has grown in a deformed manner. And specifically, it's the areas where it gets kind of knotted and kind of twisted looking. And the nice thing about it is it doesn't obey a lot of the typical rules that a straight grain piece of wood would obey, where in a straight grain wood, if it's going to split along that grain line. Whereas in the burl, it's kind of going all over the place and chaotic. And so it can lead to a stronger piece, but more interestingly, it has a lot more beautiful and exquisite pattern to that grain that when you finish it, you can bring out to show the character of it. Two pieces of just like a straight maple wood side by side, you might not be able to distinguish, but two pieces of burl, even cut from the same tree an inch apart, might look like they were from completely different species just because of that crazy amount of variation. It's almost like tumorous in, like a normal human cell versus like a cancerous cell of the same kind. It's, it looks radically different.
Thank you on that. We also have like metal, any sort of metal brush.
Yeah, metal is full disclosure once again not something that I work with in turning a lot, but I have a lot of respect for the guys that do, because it's just a completely different skill set. Because a lot of the metals you think about, like your steel and your brass and bronze and copper, and a lot of these things don't lend themselves well to hand turning on just like a hobbyist lathe, and it will require either a full on machine lathe or a CNC to produce. But I know, so CNR, which is Carnavis and Richardson, is a big name in it. I've seen some, I think I've seen some all metal Zeniths as well. And I'm sure there's lots of others, but the CNR are the ones that come to mind for me, because they're just, you know, two dudes with a machine making these things. And but they're, you know, it's metal, so it's basically indestructible. You're not going to destroy a solid brass brush handle or a nickel or aluminum or anything like that. I mean, the amount of things you'd have to do to destroy it compared to any of your resins or woods is, I mean, shocking to think of what you would have to do. You could probably run over a lot of these with your car and they'd be fine. But you got so many different choices in material, and all kind, you know, like we talked about before, all the different grades of finishing that you can do with metal, where you could do engraving and etching and just all kinds of craziness. And you could even incorporate it into, you know, combinations with other materials. So, but you know, I imagine it's probably a lot more expensive for the artisans or the manufacturers, just for the material cost, and then you have the cost of the machinery and the equipment and the time. And that's really all I have to say about that, I guess. I think there's a lot of metals you wouldn't want to use for brushes, because they would just be like unwieldy. You wouldn't want, when we talk about Damascus steel, you wouldn't want like a solid steel handle, because it would weigh a ton, or like lead, you know, or something like a solid
Cast
gold.
iron.
Yeah, cast iron, gold, plutonium. Maybe just not the best choices.
So, plutonium. You know, although, you know, you can. With that said, I think some people, you know, when they think plutonium, they think like, you know, the glowing green stuff that like Homer Simpson would like work with. But you can get like resins, and kind of going back to that, because I've seen fluorescent handles. Well, they'll add something in it and it'll glow in the dark, and that's that's also an additive, right?
Yeah, there are fluorescent resins. I think Alumalite makes one that is inherently blacklight reactive or ultraviolet reactive, but most commonly there's dyes and powdered pigments as well. And I've turned some blanks that were made by someone else for me to turn, that were fluorescent, but I've not actually like bothered to mix through them and do it myself. And my thought process was, most people don't shave under blacklight, so what's the point? But
yeah, no, I think fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you like it, more power to you. But
you know, if there's a small market, then someone can, you know, someone can take it for themselves.
Yep.
Yeah, the next one on the list is one that you're very familiar with. A lot of your people that are familiar with you is the hybrid wood and resin.
Yes, finally on the list, my favorite, I guess, just out of familiarity. So there's technically hybrid brushes where you have a block of wood glued to a block of resin, and then you turn them together, and you have like wood on the top and resin on the bottom, or the opposite. That's not exactly what I'm talking about here, but it does have a lot of the same properties, I guess, when you get down to it. But specifically, what I do is I take a natural edge burl, which is the outside of the tree where it's all like bumpy and weird, and then pour resin on top of that, and that makes the hybrid piece. But so obviously I use it. There's other places that use it, but I don't know of anyone else exclusively where it's like that's their thing. So you know, this is the portion of the show where I get to do some gratuitous horn tooting, but that's what I'm familiar with, I guess. So in this with this material, you have the best of both worlds and the worst of both worlds with your resin and your wood. So as far as the best of both worlds part of it, you have untold levels of customization in that you're customizing your resin and you're customizing your wood. So all kinds of matchups that you can do there. But with that, the huge drawback is that finishing these two items on their own is a very laborious process. Finishing them together can be even more difficult because you have to think about the different densities and hardnesses of these materials, and the wood requires special precautions like we talked about before with the cracking and everything. And then the resin portion usually is going to be pretty straightforward, but you have to think about cohesively, I'm finishing this from start to end as one item. And so if you just have half as wood and half as resin, it's easy to just say, okay, I'm going to slap some polyurethane finish on the wood and then just polish the resin and I'm good. But when you have the whole thing is fluid and together in one piece, it's not as easy. So that's how that goes.
So, I mean, you're really known for this. Like, did you arrive at this kind of, on your own, or, did you start off with just making either polyester resin or Alumalite, brushes, and then you're just like, oh, I could do this, like kind of maybe get a little bit of background to how you made this your signature style.
I'm the first to say I have no claim on the invention of this material or the first in doing it in the shaving world. All that would be completely ridiculous. Essentially, when I started off doing woodworking and I went to the local wood supply store, there is a company called Shockwood, I believe, that makes like large quantities of this hybrid material where they take the burl and they pour polyester resin over it and cut it up into blocks, and then people can use it. Their main advertisement is for bottle stoppers for wine bottles and things like that. But so while I was there getting wood for things, I saw that they had it. I picked some up and tried it with brushes. And I was like, I really like how this looks, but I can't control what colors and sizes and things like that they're using or type of wood or whatever. And so I looked into how to do it myself because I really like that kind of effect of a landscape that it gives. But it was, I started off just doing blocks of wood, and then in the course of picking up new wood, I came across this pre-existing material and learned it as thoroughly as I've been able to. But you do see companies that are using these pre-made ones, but it's usually pretty easy to tell if that's an existing one versus one that somebody meticulously slaved over to get every little bit of it looking how they want or whatever. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, you can for our listeners, you can find definitely like other like even furniture pieces, like like tables.
Yeah, the tables are a really popular one I've seen. I haven't had the guts to try anything on that scale.
Yeah, I mean, like on Instagram, you'll just see stuff where people will pour the resin, and it'll look like a river, going through a canyon or something like that. Just, some really like beautiful stuff.
I think the earliest instance of this that I can think of are I think they're called secret rings. They make, rings and necklaces and stuff where it's a piece of wood, and then they have the resin, and then I think they hand sculpt a lot of it. But it's mostly faceted edges. So it's not like they're not sculpting like a human head and sanding it. It's like a bunch of flat surfaces, but they do things that completely defy my imagination. I mean, I honestly don't know how they pull off some of the effects that they do. And in a shaving brush, it would be incredibly impressive, but that's their area.
You mentioned kind of the best of both worlds, the worst of both worlds. Is it just more brittle sometimes, or like, like where maybe the resin part will like have a chip or a crack, or the burl itself, will have the thing, and then you're just like, dang it, like.
Yeah. Essentially, the wood is the weak link in this equation. I use Alumalite, which I talked about before, incredibly strong. A lot of people use polyester, incredibly strong. Both of these are way stronger than most of the woods that are also being used in conjunction with this. Excepting like some of your crazy exotic hardwoods that are just unbelievably durable. Most of the woods that people are using they are fallible. They are a natural material that can have flaws that can result in failure. I do everything that I can to prevent that, and I've only experienced a handful of them in the time that I've been doing this. But for the way that I make them anyway, the knot goes in the wooden end, which is the weaker end. And so you have those thin walls where if anything is going to fail, that's where it's going to fail. You would think that, hey, maybe the wood and the resin could come apart. That's not something I've experienced. We took a blank, my girlfriend and I, and shot it with a bow and arrow with a 50-pound longbow, and we're able to get one to separate. But that was like blind luck. So just a random anecdote for you. But really the worst of both worlds is more in terms of, you have that. Any Alumalite brush is going to be stronger than any hybrid brush, I think, just because the Alumalite itself is stronger than most of the wood. And so it's much less likely to fail. I've never seen a Alumalite brush that has cracked under the pressure of holding like a really fat badger knot or something. Whereas I have seen wood brushes fail from that many times. Not many times mine, but many times it has happened.
Cool.
I have a question actually, just before we move on from the hybrid wood and resin, and this is more personal. On the artistic inspiration side, so kind of as long as I've known and seen kind of dogwood brushes, right? There's a kind of sort of sci-fi look to it, because when you have like a purple resin, right, looking like an alien sky against the the mountainscape of the wood part, I'm just wondering, like, was that an influence at all for you, or an appeal? Because my brain can't help but think of like, oh, this is space. This is, Star Wars.
Yeah, I guess the early ones were supposed to be more natural landscapes, like Earth natural landscapes. I was trying to recreate like night skies and northern lights and, sunset, sunrise, that kind of thing. But once I got into dyeing the woods different colors, then it's like, okay, where on Earth is there like blue mountains that are, or like vivid purple mountains? I mean, yeah, we have purple mountain majesties in the US, but I've yet to actually see them up close. So it kind of gives you more. Once I started doing the weird combinations, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, there's a little more science fiction aspect to this than it looking like the Northern Lights in Sweden, for example.
All right, next one on the list, I'll just kind of go down, is bone/horn.
Yeah, I grouped these together because they have a similar manner of working them, and they both smell really, really bad when you cut into them. Working with bone and horn is like being at the dentist getting your tooth drilled, except it's filled up your entire workshop and it's all over your clothes and stuff. It's just awful, but they look outstanding. They're really strong. I think horn has been used in shaving stuff for a very long time, and I would lump bone in there as well under ivory. I guess ivory is technically bone, not a horn. Yeah, because it's teeth. And you don't see it as much because I think part of the reason is, in order to get pieces that are big enough to make brushes out of it, it can be pretty expensive since it's a natural material. It needs to be like continuous and not, you could use a smaller piece and like glue it to wood or something, but for like a solid horn brush or solid bone, it's got to be really big to start with. And a lot of those sources, like elephant ivory, have been, illegal and out of practice for a very long time. And it does raise possible ethical concerns with where the material is sourced, or if you're opposed to using animal materials, period, then obviously this is going to be something that it would not be a big selling point for you as a material. But I think Art of Shaving has current production horn brushes that I've seen. But other than that, honestly, I draw a blank on modern in production sources of bone and horn brushes.
Would you imagine there's any difference as far as like bone being like more porous, than grainy as compared to wood, or anything like that?
So I've worked with bone and horn a lot with razor handles, not with brushes, full disclosure. And the horn has a lot more flexible nature to it. And I think that's because, I believe horn is made of keratin and bone is bone. And so the bone is going to be a lot less flexible, more porous, as you said, just because of the function that it serves in the body. Whereas horn is more of an adaptation to accomplish some completely separate task in like hunting or mating rituals and all that kind of stuff. But I think the horn is kind of built of like layers and layers of as the keratin grows, whereas bone is like a more contiguous, kind of more. I want to say it grows almost like tree-like, but not a biologist here. Just going based on the pieces that I've worked with, and if I have a sheet of bone and a sheet of horn that are an 1/8 inch, I can bend the horn like crazy, but not the bone. The bone it'll just snap. So,
and then finally on our list is clay/porcelain.
Yes, the last one that occurred to me, and I would be remiss if I didn't include it on this extremely exhaustive list of materials. Clay and porcelain. So porcelain is a variation of clay, which is why I've lumped them together. And the creation process, I imagine, is similar, but I don't know, because the last time I worked with clay on a serious level was in 7th grade art class. But there are clay and porcelain brushes in production, specifically porcelain. Pantaray is an artisan, I believe, out of Italy that makes hand sculpted and then hand painted shaving brushes. And then Rooney is a much bigger name that does porcelain brushes as well. And like I said, you can imagine how you're sculpting clay and then translating that into a shave brush. It kind of opens up a lot of possibilities that we don't have with our acrylics and our bone and wood and everything, just because of how easy it is to manipulate it. And then once it's baked and set, then that shape is taken. Whereas if you wanted to make something similar out of wood, it would be like intricate carving in that wood is in its final hardness the whole time. So you have the possibility of non-traditional shapes. But I think the porcelain and clay have some heavy drawbacks, which is why I would personally not reach for them in a brush for myself. And that is that if you drop them, they're probably dead. They are probably not going to survive a very long drop, because clays are very heavy and very fragile. And if you've ever dropped a shaving bowl or a scuttle that was made of them, then you know what results when it hits your bathroom floor.
If you dropped a dish bowl or anything like that, yes. You end up with just shards everywhere and things like that. So
yes, it suffers from the same tragic downfall as every expensive vase in every 80s and 90s cartoon. It will shatter everywhere, and there's really no coming back from that.
Yeah, I think when it comes to a lot of these specific materials, outside of the resins, a lot of the companies, manufacturers, artisans, kind of use that as their signature piece, right? I mean, I don't know if I've seen Pantaray make a non-porcelain handle, because it's just kind of that's their thing.
Yeah, that's true. Honestly, maybe they do. But sorry, Pantaray, but if your porcelain stuff is so unique that it's what you're known for. So
No,
So,
and I think, and I think it's beautiful. It's definitely, like something that you kind of blur the line between just like, art and just a, functional item. Like I'd say the same thing about your handles and a lot of other individual artisans, who
definitely.
do that. And so I think, for consumers, because I like try to like, think of as the consumer first, that is this something that like I do want to like, dive into, whether it's going to be your hybrid handles or, maybe I want to get like, like a bone collection, like a bone razor or a horn, brush or something like that. Whereas, I mean, the majority of people are definitely just getting, resin handles or probably just the regular polyester resin handles and whatnot. But it's been interesting because I don't think it was something, before we even talked about this or anything like that. I'm just like, I never thought about like the potential difference as like the consumer about, what materials are going to be used or how you as a turner would have like, success or failures, like, with it, whether it's chipping or anything like that.
Yeah,
So,
and there's people that, as long as the handle looks nice, they don't care what they get. And there's people that will absolutely never use this type of resin versus, or a handle made of this type of resin versus this other one because this one is 40% lighter and whatever else. There's a lot of personal preference at play here. The same with everything else in this hobby. Regardless of which aspect of it you look at, whether it's the 1 millimeter difference in two razor gaps or a different soap ingredient or whatever else, a 6/8 straight versus a 7/8 straight, but ultimately, I don't think that I don't think there's such thing as a bad handle material. It's just all of them have drawbacks on some level, and you sort of have to weigh what do I value in it. And I honestly think for most people in the artisan brush space, so that's a small amount of people that are already a small amount of people which are wet shavers. So this small amount of people that are seeking out artisan brushes and custom brushes, the appearance is a huge factor in it. And most people seem to be willing to compromise on everything else as long as it looks how they want it to look.
If with as many brushes and stuff like that I purchased, yeah, it was 99% was like, oh, this one's pretty.
Oh yeah.
Not this one's gonna last more durable. This one's gonna live through a nuclear holocaust or anything like that.
Yeah, mine are the same way. I mean, my two favorite handles that I have are from one artisan that uses Alumalite and one that uses polyester. Neither of them are ones that I made, and they are both like completely stunning in their own way. And I don't even think about the material throughout the entirety of the time that I'm using it because it just doesn't play a role in that process for me. But if it was made of like solid gold or porcelain or something, I feel like that would suddenly start to make a difference because then you're having to worry about the weights or the durabilities, or is this going to get stolen while I'm at work? There's all these different factors you have to consider.
I mean, this is a pretty exhaustive list. Any possibility of any? I mean, you could literally make a handle out of anything.
Yes, and there were a few things that I did not put on the list because I don't know that they qualify as handle materials. There was a huge craze for a while of putting brush knots into just random things, and there's a number of people that
like a Lego brush, like a toy.
That's right.
Or whatever it may be.
I think Scott Declaration famously put a brush knot into the ground and made the planet Earth brush on Earth Day. Yeah. I've seen there's a guy who puts them in bobbleheads, and then you have the brush is the head and then the stand is the body, but that's not what I would call a brush material. That's what I would call a toy. But you could, I mean, what couldn't you turn into a brush? I've seen snow globes. I've seen skulls. I've seen car shift knobs. It's your imagination is the only limit.
I mean, I just want to thank you for giving us all that information. It is what, just like you guys had mentioned, it's not something that's at the forefront of when I'm making a purchase, because Gerard made the comparison one time where sometimes we purchase, like for those who have a brush collection, it's like an action figure collection. It's like, oh, I don't have the blue and black one, the green, or you kind of just like trying to.
So, I mean, it's so vain, right? Like for people who do shade of the day videos or photos, that they do it, you know, based upon like the color first. You know, they'll color match like they would like their own outfits, and so I feel like, you know, with a lot of brushes, it's very much the same way.
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's great if your brush can match your soap and your razor and whatever else you need it to match, but it's also great if it looks fantastic on its own.
Absolutely.
Those are the kind of things that I seek out because I just really like the color blue. And so I get brushes with blue in them. And then regardless of whether I'm using a blue labeled soap, which occasionally I do, it looks awesome and I like looking at it. But it is interesting that you bring up, there are a lot of people that make purchases based on appearance, and a surprising number of people that make purchases based on how things will photograph. I find that a really interesting development in the hobby that was not present when I started out.
I think that trend makes sense. I mean, think about even in like restaurants and food industry, right? Now when you have an item that's Instagrammable, I mean, and that's obviously one huge medium for shaving as well as Instagram, right? So
it's the stunt photo, you know, like, and things like that. I'm here in Southern California. There's a lot of people that Instagram food, you know, and whatnot. And that's the thing. It's just like, how over the top is it going to look, you know, like, and how, you know, is this even, you know, in terms of shaving, like, is this really a brush or like, what is this, you know, at this point?
It's almost like, and, you know, don't get me wrong, I'm guilty of this too. Not so much, in shaving too. Like, for example, when I got my Wolfman razor, which are very difficult to come by, it is as much a shaving implement as it is a work of art, as it is a dopamine hit, because you can share it and other people will praise you for it. And then you see what I mean? You have shown off something and gotten that feedback that we all seek to get from social media, you know, with the same reason that people take pictures of their food is, look at what I'm eating. How great am I that I'm eating this? You know, I want to hear it from you. And I think with a lot of with our custom and artisan shaving stuff, there's a similar effect going on where it's like, not only does this thing hold up on its own merit, but other people will envy me for this maybe and validate it. Yeah. It's interesting. Like I said, it's not something that I expected early on, you know, early on in this, it was really before Instagram had taken off with shaving, and people were buying things because it was like, that's the thing I want to have. And people still do that, but now there's this other interesting phenomenon going on at the same time.
Yeah, and I think about it because we had talked about it with Rafa in our last episode, like just kind of like design and things like that, whether in his case it was like with like labels and whatnot. In your case, it's with handles and other artisans. And of course, like, you know, you mentioned the Wolfman and a lot of other premium products. There's just so much emphasis, you know, based upon like the appearance, aesthetics, and I think it's only going to get, you know, more and it's only going to propel itself. You know, that's what it's going to be in the future and things like that.
Yeah, it's crazy to look at where we came from with the first artisan soaps after LA Shaving Soap Company started with the public recipe development and everything, where people were just using like mailing envelope labels, essentially just paper and ink on a random sized container, to now everything is so meticulously designed and selected and much higher quality materials, and people are hiring expensive graphic designers that themselves have no idea that boutique shaving is a thing, and they're being called in and paid hundreds and thousands of dollars to develop art for this industry that at least this sector of it didn't exist 10 years ago, really. So it's a cool evolution. I think the like the flashiness and the razzmatazz of the advertising and the marketing and the labeling is definitely increasing, and you really do have to participate in that in order to keep up with as the market advances.
Yeah, it's definitely. I still think, with you mentioned the Wolfman razor and with brushes in general, right? We're talking functional art. And in the case of the razors, it's man jewelry, right? Because we're not, using expensive diamonds or other stones or whatever.
Yeah.
But,
Yet. We're not using them yet.
Okay, not yet.
That's true. I mean, I know I have seen gem studded brushes, but I don't think they were real gems, so I'm not necessarily going to count that, but that's the progression. I would love to see a solid gold diamond studded brush someday, not made by me by any means, but somebody who has the confidence to take on that. I'll fully embrace it for what it is.
And we'll see it being used by a James Bond villain, and
Yes.
things like that, or a mob boss, like in a movie or something along those lines.
You can only hope, yeah.
I was just thinking celebrity, right? If there's a celebrity wet shaver, for sure they're going to do 24 karat.
To think about that. Like, I wonder if you go through the sales logs of like Niagara Razors or West Coast Shaving or Artist Shaving, any of these bigger companies. What famous people have they sold to, or like royalty, or politicians? That's interesting to think about.
John and I were talking about this. I said I want to find a celebrity who's into the hobby, know? And I don't know. I have no idea if it's going to pop up, but I just think it would be very interesting, and and to see where that goes.
Yeah, I mean, you get somebody like Chris Pratt in the hobby, and things are going to explode. It's going to be completely out of control.
I hope not. Gosh.
Or or one of these one of the like the mumble rappers or the K-pop stars, somebody with like a lot of clout with young people.
BTS doesn't even grow facial hair, like or anything like that.
Don't put down our people like that.
Right.
Well, to kind of finish up on this topic, Stephen, you listed a bunch of materials here, and we've identified the hybrid wood resin as kind of your go-to. But are there any materials on the list or otherwise that is kind of on your bucket list of either to turn to a brush, or even if like a pre-existing, kind of, we've mentioned the objects around the house can be turned to a brush? Any bucket list items like that?
Sorry, I got to think about this.
You're a creative guy. I feel like you must have seen something random like that could be a good brush. Yeah.
One thing that I've gotten into in the recent years has been embedding objects in the resin. And so like my most famous one is doing the Jurassic Park replica with the little bug in it. And I've dabbled into some kind of exotic things. Like I did fossilized shark teeth, and I've done seahorses, and I've done some gemstones. I'd like to do something, I don't know, like what is the coolest thing that's like less than an inch long that you could put in a brush, So like something like a rare fossil or some kind of gem that would take well to it. That's what I'm constantly thinking about. What's something cool that I could put in there that, I don't know, that you would want in there. I mean, I've got some human teeth that I'm working on doing in there. But that's something that I think about a lot. So, but I guess, like what is the most, if we say the most expensive thing that's like less than an inch long that you can think of?
Well, throw a diamond in there.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's it. I guess I want to have so much money that I can put a 10 karat diamond in a brush and have it not matter, I'd love to see the Hope diamond have a hole drilled in it and a 28 millimeter declaration knot put in it. So,
Jay-Z, where you at?
That'd be great.
Yeah,
Jay-Z, just let's get you onto the wet shaving turn. Get that rock, get that giant diamond on there.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, it's interesting to think about, but yeah, I mean, it'd be cool to do some metal work. But you know, the investing as far as the startup costs and that is pretty crazy. So, but I'd love somebody, I don't care who it is, to make a solid gold handle. You know, even if you're not turning it but casting it, because I think gold you can cast. So just cast it in. I want to see like a crazy shape, not just like a blob, but like a, you know, something intricate. That would be cool. Like a you know, even if it's just like a Simpson chubby shape, solid gold. Yeah, somebody get on this. How has this not been done yet? Gold is not that expensive that we can't take a few ounces of it and turn it into a brush. Be real here. Or even if it's silver, like silver isn't that expensive as some of the like people are using mammoth fossils and stuff. Come on, silver's got to be more obtainable than that.
Much more so, yes.
I see the ads for it on the TV all the time. Like, just you're supposed to convert all your money to silver and then convert that into shaving brushes.
So I'm just gonna say it right now, Stephen. I just looked up the gold price per ounce. 1 ounce of gold is $1,559.
Okay, what is the volume of 1 ounce of gold?
You can use gold leaf, and then use a cheaper metal underneath. I know that's not you're go big or go home.
Guess do that around some lead, so when you pick it up, it's like, oh yeah, that's got some heft to it. But yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I'm willing to pursue this up to a certain price point. So if I mean, how many thousands of dollars of gold do I need to buy to fill up a brush? You know, like, how much is an ounce of gold in weight or in volume? Is that like a 1-inch cube or a 2-inch cube?
I don't know. You know,
we'll have to look into this.
There we go.
Or one thing that hasn't been explored is making it out of like a neodymium rare earth magnet. So then you have like a super powerful magnetic brush that, like, if you lose grip of it, it'll just like zoom across the room onto your faucet or something. That'd be cool.
Break something on the way.
You put it on your refrigerator and now it can never come off, basically.
Yeah.
So, all right, if you have the budget, if you have the capital to put up a solid gold handle, all right, you can reach Stephen Joyner.
Yeah, I'll do it. I mean, I won't, I'm going to go ahead and agree to it ahead of time, because how often does that kind of opportunity come across?
True.
I mean, if somebody came to you, you should learn to make brushes and do it, because that's a once in a lifetime right there.
It's true. Well, thank you so much, Stephen, for really just doing the research and sharing your knowledge about brush materials. I think it's something that folks haven't thought about, but it's very interesting information, and I'm very happy to share that.
Yeah, thanks. It's interesting. It was interesting for me to kind of learn more about these other things that I don't really get to use very much. And, I hope it comes across as like, I'm not just saying everybody should go buy hybrid brushes, because let me be clear, I don't have any for sale. I don't want you to buy them. The hobby, is lifted by everybody patronizing all the businesses that need our support. So, go and check out all kinds. There's all kinds of custom brush makers and larger brush makers for all budgets and tastes and everything. And every single one of these materials has somebody out there who is just absolutely killing it and pushing that material to its limits of how like exquisite the brushes can be made out of it. And I have a ton of respect for the people that are able to like zero in on their niche and really deliver these really impressive products. So, but I had to talk about the one that I'm really familiar with, or else it just, it could have been anybody talking about it, I guess. But I appreciate the opportunity. I really don't want to come across as just being like self-promoting, because that's not what I'm trying to do. I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff out there that a lot of people are doing. So.
Well, on that note of self-promotion, however, I do want folks to be able to find, or at least look at the gallery of work that you've done. So can you please share with us your website and where people can find you on social media?
Yes, so I sell brushes on dogwoodhandcrafts.com. I do a release about once a month of between 15 and 20 brushes. They usually sell out really fast because there's not very many of them, and I don't release them very often. I'm obviously very grateful for that. I post pictures of the ones that I'm working on Instagram, and the handle is Dogwood Handcrafts. And I do occasionally live stream on YouTube under my YouTube name, which is not Dogwood Handcrafts because I made it like 10 years before Dogwood. That's youtube.com/SCJoiner, Joiner. If you want to see how brushes are made, I've done some videos where it's like a produced video where I go through with different camera angles and kind of show the entire process, start to finish, with explaining what I'm doing. And I make other things on there too occasionally, just general woodworking stuff. But in the shaving space, I've done some reviews of like soaps and stuff that I like, or other people's brushes. But actual woodworking space is what I most enjoy, and I am just fortunate enough that the shaving like community and hobby has room for my interest in it, in the woodworking stuff, that it can accommodate that as a business and as a hobby and everything. So I really appreciate everybody that supports people like me and the other guys that make brushes. So we really could be making anything, and we're very fortunate to have a group of people that that our work can be actually useful for them in their everyday life.
Awesome. Well, I definitely do want to encourage folks. We'll have all the links also in the show notes, in the description below. Anyway, thank you so much for coming on to Lather Talk. We hope you can join us again in the future.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. If anybody has any, any like questions or they need help with anything, not in as far as like buying stuff from me, but as far as like if they're interested in getting started with brushes, I've helped a lot of people kind of like learn what tools they need and the materials, and how to like go about the process from start to finish. And I really like talking about that sort of thing with people. And so any questions, you can always reach out to me on the website or wherever else. So, but yeah, thanks again for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you for listening to Lather Talk. If you're enjoying the podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. We appreciate your time and support and hope to catch you next episode.